Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what a delight to have back in the studio with us today, Rebecca Bender. And she is an interesting lady with a lot of interesting things to talk about. She's a sex trafficking survivor herself and the founder of Rebecca Bender Initiative. You can go to RebeccaBender.org is her website, and it's an incredible resource for you. RebeccaBender.org. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me. Merry Christmas.
You've been busy.
We have been busy. Yeah, we've been really busy.
Boy, where do we start? You've been called in on some interesting cases, and of course your own story. A lot of folks know your story, but just quickly, you were involved in this for how long?
I was trafficked for nearly 6 years.
6 years. And by God's grace, you're out of that.
He kept me alive, and boy, has he turned it into something.
Well, has he ever? Well, tell us about some of the cases you're working on.
Yeah, well, excuse me. We recently worked that case that we had here in Jackson County that got 13 guilty convictions and a 31-year sentence.
Wow.
Worked that with Detective Jim Williams and Deputy District Attorney Zori Cook. They did a phenomenal job just combing ads, keeping all the research and getting all the investigative work done, and then to sit with the victim throughout the entire week and to just hear the jury read off guilty 13 times. We all just wept. We knew that it not only found justice for the victim, it stopped any future victims from this man that was bringing people here to Medford.
Really?
But it also set a real precedence in our county that now we have a district, a case number that we can go back and say in State versus Rucker, this was the precedent. And so, I mean, that's bringing a lot of change for our state and our county.
How did that come about? How did he get caught?
Can
you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, the case is over. It's not an open investigation. But so the trafficker was bringing a victim, 22-year-old female, and her 2 children from Stockton, California, up to Medford, Oregon, and selling them out of the local Motel 6.
Wow.
He got found because he ended up raping a child during that time, a teenage girl that had stumbled out of a party at the Motel 6, intoxicated. And so she called 911, thankfully, and they began looking for this guy who had a family that was in the room because he had the woman, the 22-year-old, and her 2 kids.
Wow.
That's why the teenager thought that maybe it was okay to go in and clean up in their room. And so they began, Detective Jim Williams, our amazing detective here in town, he began looking for this group. And when they found the female, she said, "Why haven't you been looking for me?" She had been being trafficked for 6 years with this man since she was 16 years old.
With 2 children? With
2 children that he had been to prison for abusing.
Wow.
So his threats weren't they were not just, threats. He had actually hurt her children, and so she was afraid for her kids, and she complied and didn't say help me, or some things we see with traffic victims all the time.
Yeah, you see that quite a bit.
Yeah.
So what happens after a case like this? How does she get help, and where does she go?
Yeah, so her children had been involved in the child welfare system down in the city that she lived in, and so she did need to go back to that city. The district attorney's office here in town got her a plane ticket back to her city, and I began working with local advocates and a women's shelter that accepts children there in her county. So between the 3 of us, we were able to try to get her resources, but it's going to be an upward battle for her. I think this is where the journey begins. This isn't where it ends. While it's a victory for us legally, this is where the restoration and the redemption of this young woman and her 2 children as a single 22-year-old mother, it begins, and it's going to be a long road, but she has all the support around her, and we hope that she continues to lean into the Lord and let her restore her. Amazing stories, and I think what surprises me is, again, we're all shocked of how big this issue is and how much I-5 is a corridor for this, in particular right here in Southern Oregon. Well, there's many hubs all over the country. We're not the largest hub in the country. We're not. We're probably ranked like 15th, but anywhere where you're going to have a freeway that intersects states, you're going to see, in larger metropolitan areas, actually, you're going to see a higher number of trafficking cases. You see a lot in San Diego, a lot of in LA. Portland, Seattle, and then of course if they're coming up and down that, then they are going to stop off somewhere for a couple days. And that's why most of the ads that sell trafficked persons online here in Southern Oregon will actually say on the ad, only in town for a couple days.
Right.
Well, it's a sales tactic for the trafficker that also gives us a really good clue as investigators that this is a trafficker that may be moving his victims.
Wow. So how do you work in, I mean, you don't always get a phone call. Can you actually go online and track somebody down who's selling this and doing this?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of tools out there. Ashton Kutcher is the founder of Thorn. Thorn is one of the most amazing anti-trafficking organizations that we use as well, I'm not law enforcement, but I use with law enforcement as investigating cases. And so some of these websites that sell people, they delete their ads within 6 months. And so law enforcement has to get a subpoena to ask these companies to release their ads, and often they're like, oh, sorry, we deleted them. So what Ashton Kutcher did was he invested in this tech company called Thorn that automatically archives every single ad for the last 7 years on over 100 websites that sell people for sex. And so then law enforcement can create an account with Thorn. It's called Spotify. That's the tech name of the app that was created. Law enforcement can create an account, and then they can go onto Spotify and look up all of these ads. They can just type in one cell phone number, and it starts showing you every city in the last 7 years that this person was posted. Really helps to start developing a map of where the traffickers are taking their victims.
Well, I got to say, if you're drawn to be a part of this and you're concerned about it, a lot of people are now engaging, which I'm really thankful for. And you have to be called to do this, obviously. You can talk to Rebecca. RebeccaBender.org is her website. Now, you've been involved in some other cases. What about the Sherri, is it Papini?
Sherri Papini, yeah.
What was her disappearance case? Give us an update there.
Yeah, you know, I'm not personally working the Sherri Papini case with detectives, but I am in touch with some of the advocates that are working with her directly.
Okay.
We were brought down to Redding by the Today Show a couple weeks ago.
Really? Yeah.
We did a little segment. For a long time, nobody thought, well, people question whether the motive would have been trafficking. Otherwise, there's no real motive right now for kidnappers. There's no ransom, there was no money demanded. And most human trafficking advocates know that less than 10% of trafficked victims are kidnapped. Usually it's somebody that you know. 33% of trafficked children, it's by someone they know. 29%, it's done on social media. Wow. So it's very rarely kidnapping. So we were like, we don't know if it's trafficking because it's just so rare. But when she was released and she was found to have a brand on her, that's when every human trafficking advocate automatically knew. That's a very telltale sign with human trafficking as a brand. I've been branded twice during my time of exploitation. Traffickers use it to show ownership. And so it says, much like farmers did with cattle, these are mine, so if they get loose, they run, then they can get brought back if they end up running into other traffickers. The other thing that was interesting about the Sherri Papini case was the 2 women that released her on Thanksgiving morning at 4 a.m. And a lot of people said it's very rare to find female abductors, and they're right, it is very rare. But what is not so rare is when you have a trafficker that has multiple women, he will assign the older women who have been with him the longest. It's called the bottom. It's actually a theory that's going to be released soon by an amazing survivor leader named Shamir McKenzie. But the bottom theory is the woman who's been in the home the longest has endured the most amount of trauma, beatings, and brainwash. He will assign her to do some of his dirty work so that his name, his face is not seen with other victims, with newer victims.
Right. So it's being layered now.
So potentially those 2 women could have been trafficked victims that were told to release her because there just became too much media. If you look at Sherri Papini, she looks very young. She looks between ages of 15 to 24, which is average age of trafficking. And that's what possibly we believe that the abductors saw her out jogging during school hours and maybe mistook her for a youth. And then when so much media came about, he probably had his other trafficked victims release her during a time where there would probably be not much traffic. Thanksgiving morning at 4 a.m. is.
I'm just spellbound by all of this. So she's been released, thank God.
Yes, thank God.
And you got involved in that. Any other cases you're involved in, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a couple more that we're working on. I got called by some investigators and some attorneys on the Long Island serial killer case, who we believe to have been all trafficked women that were found in one area, 10 to 17 women killed and murdered.
Really?
And then potentially might be doing a little bit of work on that Klamath Falls case that's going on right now, and working with Detective
So what's your
Jim
role
on
in
that.
these cases, can you say?
Well, just as a human trafficking expert,
Okay.
we see things when we look at ads and when we look at emails that other people don't see because we've been there. We also are able to understand how traffickers work, because living with traffickers
Right.
for 6 years gives you a really deep understanding of the coercion and the grooming tactics, where police officers might go, well, I don't understand this one part, can you explain this one situation? And I say, oh, that's really common. This is what traffickers always usually do. And outsiders just wouldn't know. And so
Yeah.
I'm just really thankful that the Lord brought me back to life, restored me, set my feet on solid rock, and now is able to use everything that the enemy intended for harm for God's honor and glory to help bring justice and help rescue victims.
The story that we hear so often, and the words I say so often, whatever God saves you from brings you through, usually turns around, makes you a minister too.
Absolutely.
And you
that's
are
it.
certainly a living example of that. Let me take a quick break. We've got some other things to share with you. Again, Rebecca Bender's with her, and you can go to RebeccaBender, BENDER.org is her website. We'll be right back.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
I found our legislator doing. Welcome back to Focus Today, and what an honor to have back with us today Rebecca Bender. She's a sex trafficking survivor and now considered an expert, founder of Rebecca Bender Initiative, and her own website, which is an incredible resource, is RebeccaBender.org. And let me encourage you to do that, especially if you are drawn to work in this area. Quickly, your big plans for 2017? What's God calling you to do?
We're doing so much. We run the largest and only online program for survivors in the country. That's what we've been doing for the last 3 years. We now have almost 100 survivors that go through our program a year. So we're growing, and we need help. We need donations to hire new operations people.
Right.
As I continue to move nationally all over, and even though this is my hometown, and work cases and help other victims. We have other big things coming, maybe a second book coming out in 2017. We need more staffing. We can't continue to run a program that helps restore 100 survivors a year. Girls, we focus on girls who live in small towns just like Medford, all over the country, where there might not be organizations that exist to provide services. So we do it all online via Skype, and we're really excited. Our program is growing. It's, again, the largest and only online program in the country that focuses on small town girls. And
so they can help you through your website?
yes,
Rebecca
you can go
Bender.
to donate there and help us. We want to hire some more teachers so that I can continue doing investigations. I can't do it all. We need help. We need a lot of help.
I get that. All right, RebeccaBender.org. Let me ask you this. You think our legislatures starting to wake up to this and maybe looking at the laws and the loopholes in the laws that makes it hard for you to zero in on some things? When are we going to do the simple thing of making it a crime to buy sex instead of selling it?
Yeah, that's such a great call.
Yeah.
We've been trying, and we actually, Oregon and Washington are two of the leading states in regards to legislation and everything that's getting changed, not just in policy, but also in practice. The Ending Modern Slavery Initiative, which I know I think Senator Merkley signed off on, just passed 2 days ago. That's going to combine over $1 billion from all over the world, United Nations initiative to bring over $1 billion into anti-trafficking work. And no one else wanted to step up to the plate on a worldwide level until US agreed. And we just agreed 2 days ago.
Wow.
So that's going to be a huge victory for us as advocates moving forward. I know the Attorney General with the new administration has already began reaching out to several of us as survivor leaders for the new Attorney General Advisory Council on the White House level. So that's going to be really exciting.
Good.
We have the Trafficking Victims Reauthorization Act that's going to come out in 2017 that's hopefully going to allow what's called vacator law. Vacator law means allowing the victim to have her criminal record wiped clean during the years of her trafficking. Because as you know, traffickers oftentimes will make the victim commit crimes, or the crime of prostitution itself is a crime. And so you have a lot of victims that get out and they have all of these prostitution and solicitation charges on their record. It's really hard to move forward with your life and get a job, and explaining that at every single job interview and hoping the person interviewing you has empathy. It's just hard. It's another hurdle that we see when it's time for that long term of restoration.
It would seem obvious that when you see an ad, you just go after that ad and try to make the connection. And your answer to that is pretty interesting, because I never thought for a moment, how can you determine whether that's a minor or not?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, human trafficking doesn't mean just children. Human trafficking can mean adults, as long as force, fraud, or coercion can be proven. But if they're under 18, you don't have to prove forced fraud or coercion. You know, they're not legally old enough to consent to stripping, pornography, or commercial sex. So just by them being minors alone means that they're victims of exploitation. Adults, you have to prove forced fraud or coercion, so it gets a little bit harder. So the question of, if you're seeing all of these ads on over 100 websites, why aren't law enforcement just setting up stings and going after all the ads? And the answer is resources, right? I mean, there's only so many detectives.
Yeah, you could do that all day long.
Yeah, there's only so many. We can't arrest our way out of a problem. And unfortunately, the law will arrest the victim for the act of prostitution. And oftentimes, there may be women that say, I want to be here, I don't have a trafficker. And so now we've used all of these resources, spent money on hotel rooms and computer and microphones, and put on all this manpower, and we may or may not rescue 1 or 2 children victims. So Operation Cross Country, FBI, FBI annually does Operation Cross Country, and that is one big sweep online. When
a gal is rescued, does that become an open door to go after her pimp? I mean, does it become a legitimate lead to go get the guy?
Not always. It depends on how much she's willing to open up and talk. You know, you can't. You have to oftentimes have witness testimony in order to prosecute. And so it's really about getting that victim a human trafficking advocate. We recommend a survivor human trafficking advocate. Girls open up to us quicker than they open up to other people. I can tell my story, she'll tell her story, and the investigator's just sitting next to us taking notes. And then it becomes about 2 girls swapping war stories like Vietnam vets instead of an investigator or an advocate trying to pressure her to talk. It's just a different dichotomy between us. So if they're brave enough to talk, then yeah, you can go after the trafficker.
It seems to be the lowest of life for men to be doing this, but it's a big business. And they make a lot of money at it, right?
You know, not only do traffickers make a lot of money, it's low risk for them because the girl's getting arrested for prostitution and they're sitting at home watching TV, but it's also really, in a sense, low risk for buyers. And we have some new research that's coming out about men who buy sex that's just fascinating. 95% are Caucasian American males on a worldwide level. Heavy use of pornography on every single one, ages 25 to 45. And the number one common factor is also economic stability. They're stable financially. They can afford to buy people. And there's not very much. Instead of going after the victim, we really want to start pressuring our legislation to start going after these buyers and making it illegal to purchase a human being.
Yeah, I mean, that's just such a no-brainer. All right, now, looking for somebody who potentially would be an abductor, to me, is always interesting, because we have a hard time picking up the phone and saying, go after this person. He doesn't pass the OK test here. You know, all of a sudden a stranger becomes this friend, or becomes this advocate and this close. I mean, all the signs are there. So what do you do if you sense somebody doesn't pass the smell test? What do you do here?
It's a great question. And sometimes it can be hard. It's like, well, it feels kind of weird. This guy's kind of creepy, but I don't want to call 911. It seems, you know. One of the things, first off, that I would recommend is visiting RebeccaBender.org/human trafficking. On that website, we have 15 warning signs that exploitation exists. And it's a brochure that you can print out free of charge, and it's a checklist of, is the boyfriend 5 years or older or more? Do they have expensive things? Is she frequently visiting out of town? You know, all of these different 15 different things. Are they fast tracking a relationship? Is your daughter dating a trafficker? You know, as we know, 90% of the time it's someone they're dating and that they know. It's not an abductor all the time. How do we as parents make sure that our children know what to look for? How do we know what to look for if a child is in that, what we call a grooming phase, before they've been exploited? Let's get them now while the trafficker's trying to gain their trust. What do you look for? So that website gives you a brochure you can print out. It's called the Red Flags of Human Trafficking. Are you dating a trafficker? But what we recommend is if you see something suspicious, to call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. It's 1-888-3737-888.
Okay.
And it's a national hotline that gathers data and information and collects it in one place on a national scale. And as you and I know, traffickers move their victims. They're not staying in one state. So what's really helpful is when you call the hotline and they start getting these same kind of tips of 50-year-old man, 15-year-old female, sketchy at Denny's, and now they have it in Washington, Oregon, and California. Now the human trafficking hotline can reach out to law enforcement and say, hey, we're starting to see this thing going on in these 3 states. This is the information we have from all of these people who have called in with what they thought might not be a big deal. But if that's been the same tip in a number of things, law enforcement will get involved.
Most abductors are a part of a network, right?
Not necessarily, no.
I mean, they get in on their own, or?
You know, it's really interesting. Right now there's over 25 different types of human trafficking. There's labor and sex, and then there's all different type of typologies, we call it. And so organized crime is definitely one of those types, but it's one of 25 ways. And so helping law enforcement to understand what looks different in cantinas in Houston versus casasitas in Los Angeles versus pimp control trafficking in Medford, Oregon versus, you know, labor control trafficking where people are coming in from overseas on legal work visas. And then that employer knows you're going to get deported if you don't stay working for me because that's on your legal visa. And so then they never pay them. And how do you know what to look for in all 25 cases? And that's really what we do a lot of. Half of our program is about helping these 100 survivors a year that live in small towns. The other half is helping first responders find them.
Catching a trafficker, does that become a resource to in some kind of a plea bargaining to go back through the network and catch other people?
Very rarely do traffickers talk. They do their little bit of time and they get out. But what does become helpful is obtaining their cell phone, their computer, because then you have so much information that they weren't willing to share that you have anyway. So you can start to see how they operate. Sometimes they operate in little mini networks. Sometimes it's organized crime. Sometimes it is illicit massage parlors, and they own 30 of them all over the state. And you bust one, doesn't really matter if you don't follow the paper trail back to who the original owner is and bust all 30.
Well, Rebecca, you're a blessing. I'm just stunned every time I talk to you about this issue. And is the recognition and the effort to stop it growing?
It is growing. You know, I will say about 5 years ago, we had a 14-year-old trafficked girl in Grants Pass, Oregon. She became my foster daughter. At that time, her trafficker got 5 years in prison. He'll be released next month. And to see, and she was 14, right? 5 years for a 14-year-old. She still lives here, and he's released next month. And we're gonna be gearing up for that, and we are as an office. To see what happened then with a 22-year-old victim. So now an adult versus a minor, to get 31-year sentence. I think that in itself shows in the last 5 years, we went from 5 years sentences to 31-year sentences. So our prosecutors are getting smarter, our investigators are getting trained, our jury is starting to understand the issue of commercial sex. Our judges are starting to see these women and children as victims, not teen prostitutes. Right? That's putting the blame back on the victim, which has been so common with the exploitation of human beings. And so I think that alone is showing we're really making change here, and change is happening. Keep giving, keep supporting, keep talking about it, and keep thinking about what your circle of influence is, right? Do you know the superintendent of a school and you want to put an assembly on? Are you friends with the head of a hospital and you want to get an emergency medical training in? You know, think about your level of influence and your circle, and give us a call. We'd love to bring in some trainings and some awareness.
All right, go to RebeccaBender.org. That's the website, incredible resource, and get involved, and there's some information there and things you can print out that are free. Thank you, Rebecca, for what you do and what God is using you. So let's stay in touch.
Yeah, he's so good. He's the one. He restores.
Amen. Merry Christmas.
You too.
All right, we'll be right back.